Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a huge topic, the global infrastructure race. It's massive.
Absolutely. We're talking trillions of dollars needed for roads, ports, energy, you name it.
And right now, there are these two, competing visions shaping up. Big time.
Yeah, you've got China's Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI, which has been, the dominant player for about a decade now.
But then the G7, the big industrial nations led by the U.S., they've announced this major countermove.
That's right. President Biden committed to mobilizing, I think it was $600 billion over 5 years. They're calling it the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, or PGII.
So that's what we're diving into today. We're looking at sources, trying to figure out, is this U.S.-led plan actually viable?
Can they really pull it off, or is this just another announcement?
Exactly, because the media, immediately jumped on it, calling it the American version of BRI, which kind of suggests
It's more about countering China than, say, pure development.
precisely. And that framing, it immediately brings up this issue of credibility, doesn't it?
Oh, massively. The U.S. and the G7, frankly, they have a serious credibility deficit when it comes to these huge, long-term global promises. A deep one.
And it's not like this is their first attempt, is it? We're looking at, 3 strikes now?
Pretty much. This isn't the first plan aimed at countering the BRI. We've seen 2 others that basically just fizzled out.
Right. Remind us of those.
Okay, so back in 2019, under Trump, the U.S., Japan, and Australia launched something called the Blue Dot Network.
Vaguely remember that. What happened?
Well, the sources we looked at just say it ended unresolved, basically went nowhere.
Okay, strike 1.
Then, in 2021, the G7 tried again. This time it was the Build Back Better World Initiative, B3W.
Ah, yes, B3W. Lots of fanfare around that one.
And lots of fanfare, but again, it just failed to materialize. Nothing really happened.
That's correct, too.
And now, this $600 billion PGII, the third major attempt in, 4 or 5 years?
That pattern. I mean, you can understand why there'd be enormous skepticism, especially in the developing world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. They've heard these promises before.
But the sources suggest this isn't just about global plans failing. They point inwards, don't they, towards issues within the U.S. itself.
That's a key point in the analysis, yeah. It's hard to project infrastructure competence abroad when your own infrastructure at home is, struggling.
How bad is it?
The sources note this perception of the U.S. as a, quote, magical country that cannot solve problems. They point to long-standing domestic issues.
Like what specifically?
Things like the failure to sort out national health care, which, believe it or not, has been debated since 1912.
Wow. Since 1912.
Yeah. And of course, its own infrastructure disrepair.
I know they passed a big infrastructure bill recently in the U.S., but wasn't the grade still pretty low?
It was. The American Society of Civil Engineers gave U.S. infrastructure a C++, which sounds okay, maybe.
Maybe.
But the sources point out that was actually its highest grade in 40 years. It often got Ds before that.
40 years. Okay, so not exactly a shining example. Why does this pattern keep repeating? Is it just politics?
It seems rooted in, political and institutional problems. The analysis highlights the shift in U.S. politics away from long-term leadership. Towards short-term showmanship, really, driven by constant election cycles and partisan fighting.
And big infrastructure projects, they take decades, right? They don't fit neatly into a 2 or 4 year cycle.
Exactly. They require long-term vision and stable funding. And the U.S. system, according to this analysis, struggles with 3 key shortages for these kinds of projects.
Okay, what are they?
First, a lack of consensus. Endless partisan battles make long-term agreement really hard.
Okay, makes sense.
Second, a lack of reliable money. Public funding is always at risk of being cut in the next political fight.
Right, budget battles.
And third, maybe surprisingly, a lack of personnel. Specifically engineers, skilled STEM workers.
Really? A shortage of engineers?
Yeah, attributed to decades of deindustrialization, the shift towards a finance-heavy economy since the 80s.
So the system itself, the short-term focus, the political instability, the skills gap, it makes these huge, long-term public projects really difficult to execute.
That's the argument. Public infrastructure has these long payoff times, collective benefits. It sort of clashes with short-term private profit motives and unstable politics.
Which creates this competence gap when compared to a system like China's, which can apparently push through 50-year plans.
Precisely. That stability and kind of institutional memory make a huge difference.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about the ideology. The G7 plan makes a big deal about democratic values, doesn't it?
It does. It's explicitly framed that way. It's presented as like an institutional competition. Our model based on values versus theirs.
And playing devil's advocate here, isn't that a good thing? Doesn't emphasizing values like transparency maybe prevent the kind of debt trap criticism sometimes aimed at the BRI?
Well, that's the pitch, certainly. Promote transparency, good governance. But from the perspective of many developing nations, plans that come loaded with political conditions are often seen as problematic or just rejected outright.
Is there evidence for that rejection?
Yeah, one African researcher quoted in the material put it very bluntly. He said, and I'm quoting here, "There is no such thing as a democratic road or an authoritarian bridge. Infrastructure's ultimate goal is development."
That really cuts through the rhetoric, doesn't it? Puts the focus squarely back on just getting things built.
It does. And you contrast that with China's stated BRI principles. Non-interference in internal affairs, no political conditions attached, focus on consultation and shared benefits.
So when the U.S. leads with values,
increasingly, developing nations tend to view it less as a genuine development plan and more as, well, a geopolitical move.
an attempt to pull them into what some call a new Cold War.
Exactly. And given the tangible roads, ports, power plants they might be getting from the BRI, many are simply unwilling to choose sides like that.
Which logically brings us to the money. The $600 billion pledge. Is it real? Or is it, as some sources suggest, a bit of a funding illusion?
Well, the skepticism here is deep, and it's rooted in history. This isn't just about the previous failed counter-BRI plans. It's about a longer track record of Western aid promises.
Like the climate finance pledges.
Exactly. Think back to the Copenhagen Climate Conference in 2009. Western nations promised $100 billion a year to help developing countries adapt.
How much has actually been delivered?
Over a decade later, that $100 billion annual target has never been fully met, consistently fallen short.
And the U.S. role in that shortfall?
The sources point to the U.S. as being the worst G7 contributor, proportionally speaking, to overseas development aid. In 2011, for instance, it provided only 0.18% of its gross national income.
0.18%. What's the target they agreed to?
The internationally agreed target is 0.7%. So 0.18% is, well, it's a long way off.
So that history definitely hangs over this new $600 billion promise. Decades of falling short.
Absolutely. It creates a show-me-the-money attitude.
But there's another layer to this funding issue, isn't there? Something about where the aid money actually ends up. This idea of aid recirculation.
Yes, this is fascinating and, frankly, quite damning. A Malian foreign ministry expert highlighted this often hidden mechanism.
Okay, what is it?
Essentially, when Western countries provide aid, a huge chunk of it, potentially up to 70%, flows right back to the donor countries.
Wait, hang on. 70%? 7-0. How?
It's often built into the conditions of the aid. Think about it. The money pays for expensive feasibility studies done by Western firms.
Okay.
It pays the very high salaries of Western consultants and experts, who often earn many times what local experts would.
Right.
And crucially, it often mandates that key equipment, technology, or services must be bought from companies back in the donor country.
So by the time you subtract all those costs that essentially flow back west.
The Malian expert estimated that less than 20% of the original aid money might actually remain for local development, local jobs, local capacity building on the ground.
Wow. So Western aid can function almost like a subsidy for Western corporations and consultants, rather than primarily a development tool for the recipient nation.
That's the criticism, yeah. It benefits the donor economy significantly.
And you can see why, then, some developing nations might prefer China's model, even if it's less transparent. It might be opaque, but...
But it delivers tangible results on the ground, a road, a bridge, a power plant, often using Chinese materials and labor, which might still be faster and cheaper than navigating the Western aid bureaucracy and conditions.
Okay, let's talk about competence. Pure capability. The U.S. and G7 seem to be focusing this PGII plan more on soft infrastructure, right?
That's a noticeable strategic element. Things like clean energy projects, strengthening health systems, promoting gender equality, digital infrastructure, ICT.
Is that a way to maybe sidestep direct competition with China, where China is strongest?
Right.
Which is arguably the big, heavy stuff, the hard infrastructure.
It certainly looks like a strategic pivot, yeah. Trying to play on a different field, perhaps, because China's reputation in hard infrastructure is, well, formidable.
They're sometimes called the infrastructure maniac, aren't they?
Globally, yes. The scale and speed are just incredible. As of mid-2022, China had signed BRI cooperation deals with 149 countries and 32 international organizations.
Huge reach. What about the actual projects and investment?
Over 3,000 BRI cooperation projects initiated. The total investment was approaching $1 trillion. $1 trillion.
That's staggering scale. But it's not just the money, is it? It's the ability to actually do it.
Exactly. It's the capability. China offers the whole package, the full industrial chain.
What does that mean, practically?
It means it can handle everything from the initial design, the engineering, the actual construction, providing the technology, arranging the financing, even training local personnel, start to finish.
A one-stop shop for nation building, almost.
Pretty much. Spanning technologies from basic construction to, advanced high-speed rail or telecoms, that comprehensive capacity is very rare, especially compared to the U.S. with that engineer shortage we mentioned.
The sources had some pretty vivid examples of this difference in speed and capability. The Mali Road story.
Oh yeah, that one's striking. European experts spend 3 months doing a feasibility study for a road. Their conclusion: not economically viable, project rejected.
Okay.
The Malian president then asks China. The Chinese embassy connects him with a company. 3 months later,
Don't tell me.
the road is finished, completed, built.
3 months of study versus 3 months to build the entire road. That's quite a contrast.
It highlights the difference in maybe bureaucratic hurdles and just sheer mobilization capacity. And it's not an isolated case.
What about the high-speed rail examples?
Right. Compare the Jakarta-Bandung high-speed rail in Indonesia, built by China, nearly finished in about 6 years.
Okay. And the comparison?
Japan's Mumbai-Ahmedabad high-speed rail project in India. It started a year before the Indonesian one. But by the time the sources were reporting, only about 10 kilometers of viaduct had actually been built.
10 kilometers built versus an almost completed line in roughly the same time frame.
Wow. It shows a profound difference in execution speed and navigating complexities on the ground.
But interestingly, the sources also mentioned that Chinese companies can compete and win in Western-funded projects if the process is fair.
Yes, that's a crucial point. It's not just about the BRI model itself. The example given is a major bridge in Croatia, funded by the EU.
What happened there?
There was initial resistance, apparently, to a Chinese firm bidding, but the tender was open and transparent. The Chinese company won the bid fairly.
And the result?
They completed the bridge successfully, on time, big celebrations locally. It suggests that the competence is real, market-tested, not just propped up by state directives.
So if the G7 was purely focused on development outcomes, they could potentially work with capable firms, regardless of origin, based on market principles.
Theoretically, yes. Which brings us back to the motives behind the G7 plan. Is it really about development, or is it more about conflict, geopolitics?
What do the sources conclude on the motives?
They lean towards the view that U.S.-led plans like this are often driven by complex, sometimes impure motives. Not just development, but also aims to, quote, disrupt or damage China's initiatives.
Why? What drives that?
Part of it is geopolitical rivalry, clearly. But the sources also mention the influence of powerful domestic interest groups within the U.S. Think the military-industrial complex, maybe the health insurance lobby needing new markets. These groups shape policy.
So the showmanship we talked about domestically, it translates into foreign policy aimed more at disrupting rivals than purely leading on development.
That seems to be the core argument presented in the analysis, yes.
Yeah.
More about reacting and disrupting than proactively building.
What's China's stance on these competing plans? Are they just dismissing them?
Officially, no. China's public stance has been consistent. They say they welcome other infrastructure plans, including the West's. They state they're open to cooperation on specific projects.
But with conditions.
The condition seems to be that cooperation should be based on market principles, on contracts, and crucially, that political factors or attempts to undermine China aren't forced into the deals. Business is business, essentially.
Okay, so let's try and synthesize this. The core takeaway seems to be that this global infrastructure competition isn't just about who pledges more money.
No, definitely not. It's fundamentally a competition between two different models.
Right. One model, China's BRI, focused heavily on, well, actual development outcomes, demonstrating massive capability, speed, and efficient implementation, even if opaque.
And the other model, the US G7 approach, which seems constrained by internal political failures, these deep credibility issues from past broken promises, and driven heavily by geopolitical positioning rather than just development needs.
Which leaves us with a pretty stark final question, doesn't it?
It does. Given that history, the pattern of failure, the funding doubts, the institutional constraints, you have to ask, is this latest $600 billion pledge, the PGII, destined to just be more talk?
More free speech, as one source put it, just words echoing in the G7 meeting rooms.
Exactly. Is it just words, or will it translate into a real, viable, transformative force for global development? Or will it become, the fourth unresolved plan?
That really is the multi-billion, maybe even trillion-dollar question going forward. Yeah. Something for all of us to watch very closely.
Indeed. It remains to be seen if the political will to actually build is there, not just the will to announce.
A powerful thought to end on. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today.